Next, I'm going to talk about teaching. Teaching, just talking to my peers who graduated at the same time from Vanderbilt as me, it's been really interesting talk. Everyone says the same thing about, like, if you're not really mindful, teaching your courses will just take over your life. Mostly because we're all passionate about special education. A lot of us teach courses where we have future teachers or researchers. And it's really an important responsibility to take seriously. So what I've really tried to do, and I've gotten better over time, is figuring out how can I do a really good job teaching this class, but also do it in a reasonable way that I am shrinking the amount of time that I'm having to dedicate to it without sacrificing quality. And I would like to think that I've accomplished that. But it's kind of a work in progress. So if you talk to me like next year, I'll probably have more ideas other than what I'm going to share with you today. The first thing that I would advise is that you think in advance, how much time am I willing to actually spend prepping for class this week? And a strategy that I use that's going to sound like I'm procrastinating is that I don't let myself prep for the next week until I'm pretty close to the time that I'm actually going to have to teach. So I did day of or day before. And that way I can't spend more time on it than what I have capped myself for. I don't know about you guys, but I feel like if I don't have like a deadline that I'm working towards, you just think of other ways to keep making something better, right? So I feel like that's true for writing too. So if I'm writing a paper, if I don't set deadlines for myself, I'll keep working on it, but I could always make a paper better. At some point, you gotta say, I've reached the bar that I need to, and now I'm gonna move on. So you gotta do that for yourself with teaching. The other reason is that unlike research, you have like really hard deadlines, so you gotta be ready for class. So you can leverage that to kind of use that stress in a positive way. I gotta be ready for class in 3 hours. How am I actually going to get this? What's the most efficient way to do this in 3 hours? So you'll hold yourself to actually being really efficient with your time. But budget enough time that you actually can do a good job. So if you budgeted 3 hours and you realize I'm not ready for class, you might have to increase that amount of time. My message here is really to be mindful of how much you're spending and don't let that time creep just get higher and higher. Be intentional. I have a policy that I tell my students that they are not allowed to email me about assignments, which is going to sound crazy, right? But the first couple of classes that I've taught, I don't even want to estimate how many hours I spent replying to people who are like, so is this what you wanted me to do? Can you give me feedback on this assignment before I turn it in? Can you re-explain how to do this? And I thought, I am just not going to do this anymore. So I need to figure out how I can allow my students to be successful, so set up supports for them, that I'm being fair to them, but also not answering like 5 emails a day related to this stuff, that questions overlap with each other, and they should have already known this information about what we talked about in class. And some of it was on me. I need to be clear with my own expectations. So I actually have a policy in my syllabus for every class that I teach that says, please do not email me about expectations for an assignment. The time that you can talk to me about those things is before class, after class, or during office hours. If you can't come to office hours, you can email me to make an individual appointment with me, but you must schedule that appointment before office hours pass. So you can't just wait for the day before class and schedule an appointment with me. And it's amazing how many emails you eliminate by making people think, does this question actually rise to the level that I really want to walk over to Matt's office and talk to him about it? And 90% of the time, I think the answer is no. Like, it'd be easier if I just asked the peer. It'd be easier if I just read the directions. So just making that bar higher eliminates a lot of those things. The other thing is I review expectations in just agonizing detail before anyone actually has to do anything. So for every single assignment, I have a rubric that I spend up to 20 minutes of the end of class walking through really slowly and asking for questions all the way through. That way I feel like I've done my job, that I've made this crystal clear before I said you can't reach out via email. And I have a 2-hour block of office hours that I try to arrange at a time that almost everybody can come or make an individual appointment. So that's how I feel like I'm being fair to them, but I'm also cutting down on all of those emails. And those office hours, probably only 45 minutes of it on average gets used a week. And otherwise, I'm just sitting in a conference room that I booked working. So I've cut down multiple hours from emails down to 45 minutes, where I'm actually giving higher quality instruction and feedback, because it's one-on-one to somebody live, which is way better than this email chain that bounces back and forth, and I'm not sure if anyone actually understood the clarification that I was giving them. So I feel good about it and that I'm doing a good job, but shrinking the time.
I'm curious, if you get a rule-breaking email, do you respond to say, I don't answer emails, or do you just not respond?
This is going to sound terrible, but I cut and paste the section from the syllabus. And I tell them in advance that's what I'm going to do.
Okay.
But I also try to be really clear the first day of class that, like, this is the email policy related to coursework, but I care about you as a person. And if something awful is going on in your life and you need support, then do email me. That's the kind of the conversation I want to have, because we've cleared the deck from this stuff we could have taken care of with class time. So I try to make it clear that I want to be accessible. I just have a better way for dealing with these kind of assignments than what usually degrades into a long email chain. But yeah, good question. I feel a little bad when I cut and paste and send, but I tell them I'm going to do it. So I feel like you knew this coming. Back row.
I have a friend who's on faculty and has a similar email policy, and she, the first time, will reply back to their email and remind them that, like, she doesn't. So she replies with an email that says, I don't reply to these kinds of emails. And then she says, if you do it again, I will not reply at all. So, like, they get that first.
I've never had a second one after I send it.
I don't know if she has either.
That'd be a good idea, so you don't have to keep sending the same one over and over. But you have to do it at least once, because somebody will test you and think, oh, he didn't really mean it. Or, it's not for me, that's for everybody else. It's okay if I do this. And then you'll find yourself having to do what you were trying to set things up not to do. The other thing that I try to do is cut my time down on grading. So something that I learned early on is that I would spend hours poring over written assignments. I thought really carefully and meaningfully to give written feedback, and I learned over time I'm not really sure how many people actually read my written feedback and learned anything from it. So I thought, why am I spending all this time when I can do something different to give more meaningful feedback and save myself time at the same time? So again, trying to keep quality up by reducing time. Making expectations explicit, which I've already talked about, is one way to cut down on grading. So you don't have to sift through assignments and try to figure out where things are, because you've got an explicit format. Things have to be done a certain way. The other thing that I have students do is I have them color code their assignments. So when I teach students to write IEP goals, I make them color code every section of that IEP goal for two reasons. One, so they know if I didn't color code something, I didn't do it, so they turn a better assignment in to begin with. And second, when I'm grading, I have this rubric, and my rubric is color coded too, so I match with red, match with blue, done, 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 done. And when I time myself, it's less than half the time that it was taking me before, because the quality of what they turn in is better to begin with, and I don't have to think, I just go to those points. Another thing that I do is I often have students turn in revisions to assignments, and I felt like it took me forever to figure out, okay, what did I tell them to do the first time? Did they actually do those things? And where's the part of this paper that's actually changed? So one day I had a eureka moment when I was reviewing for a journal. And I thought, when we do journal reviews, we have to actually clearly mark everything that we changed and then give everybody like an itemized list of here's what you said that I should do, and here's what I did in response to that. So I make my students do that too. Also cuts down my time considerably. Something else that I do is I find myself, if I don't look at small chunks of something, so people turn in like this big assignment and I haven't seen an outline or I haven't seen steps along the way, I have one or two people turn in something and like that is just really not even close to what I was wanting, and I have to give just a ridiculous amount of individualized feedback to that one person. So the way I cut down that on the front end is I make everybody turn in an outline of major assignments in advance. I give a 10-minute quiz at the beginning of class. And within that 10-minute quiz, I can flip through everybody's outline and put everybody's in a stack that's like, you're good to go. And then I have like 3 that like, this is not close. And I ask those people to stay after class. And I fix it verbally with them in about 15 minutes. And I don't have to read their mess of the full paper that I'm going to read later. So that little bit of time on the front end is effective. The other thing that I started doing is scheduling brief conferences instead of writing really long written feedback. So if I'm grading an assignment, I take notes that are good enough that I know what I meant, instead of trying to write out these long things that someone else would know what I meant. Also helps that my handwriting is just awful, so I don't have to worry about it being good enough that someone else is going to read it. I conference with them for 2 minutes, and I talk through my feedback instead. More efficient for me. And the other thing I do is if I have feedback that's relevant to like half the class, I stop writing it on the papers, and I just make 10 minutes of class where I go through those things for everybody. It's also a sign to me that I need to improve my teaching on the front end, if lots of people have the same issue. I know this sounds like a little thing, but I make everyone like turn everything in exactly the same way. So rubric is stapled, assignment is stapled, paper clipped together, so I can take the two apart, put them alongside. Just because when I time myself when I grade, so I see how long it takes to grade each paper. And I couldn't believe how much time I was just like pulling apart staple things, stapling them back together. I thought, I'm not doing this anymore. So put that on the students, have them do that for me, helps me be more efficient. When it comes to grading, I set myself an amount of time that I'm going to spend. I just use an app on my phone so that I keep resetting when I grade each paper. And I try for most assignments to not spend more than 5 minutes per paper. So when you multiply 25 people, that's a lot of time. So I try to figure out how much time am I willing to grade everybody's paper, and then I divide down for each person. And I think this is really analogous to what Chris was describing as far as if you get one thing that's low quality, you don't want to spend an inordinate amount of time giving a ton of written feedback to that person. At times probably better spent for your student just having a verbal conversation with them. Otherwise, it's amazing how much time it can take to reteach someone how to do the assignment and written feedback. Also, I find that once you've given people like 3 to 5 pieces of big substantive feedback that are really high quality, a lot of students, they're not going to digest a lot more than that when you give it to them. So if I feel like I've done that in a sufficient way and they're going to be able to learn something meaningful the next time, then I'm done. I move on to the next thing. Other things that I do is I design stuff I don't have to grade in class. So outside of class, so I'm able to actually assign grades in class. So in my instructional methods courses, I have people take video of them actually applying strategies in their fieldwork. They bring it into class. They evaluate each other in small groups in a really structured way, and I just bounce from group to group to group and just check off that people have met expectations for those things, and then I move on. I don't have to grade something outside of class, and they've actually gotten higher quality feedback because somebody's actually watched a real video of them trying this out, and they've gotten feedback from their peers. Also, I randomly choose like a third of the class that I'm going to completely watch their videos. I'm rotating, do a different third of the class each time they bring a video in. So everybody's gotten direct feedback from me, feedback from their peers, which I think is better than getting just written feedback on lesson plans and not what you've actually done. So I feel really good about that. Other things that I've done is I've learned that making big written midterms and finals is really time consuming to grade. So instead, I've used conferencing time for that, and I have people, again, bring in videos themselves actually doing stuff with real kids. And I set aside that conference time for each student, and after that conference, their grade is already entered, I've moved on. It's not additional time that I'm going to spend grading outside of that conference. That said, when you multiply 15 minutes times all of your students, that's going to be half a day conferencing with everybody. But that's still less time that it would have taken me to grade long written assignments, and once it's done, it's done. Scheduled, finished, doesn't bleed into time that I could have been doing, working on my research instead. I also initially had the problem that students would come to me and they would say, Dr. Brock, I worked really hard in this class. Can you please round up my grade? Or is there an extra credit assignment that I can do? Is there something that I can do to raise my grade? And I learned that I needed to make policies in advance because otherwise you just get yourselves in a sticky situation where you have to tell the student, like, no, this is what you've earned, or you feel like you're being arbitrary when you give people opportunities to raise their grade because they asked. So I made policies on the front end to avoid these conversations. Otherwise, I just found myself being pestered by people who were just at the last minute that apparently didn't want to work hard during the semester, but wanted to do what they could at the last minute to get themselves an A. So I make grade calculation completely transparent on the syllabus, and I make it really clear that here's the point band for each grade. You get this number of points, this is the grade that you get. There will be no adjustments, there will be no extra credit. It is what it is. I post grades instantly for every assignment that I grade onto an online system. Almost everybody has something like that at a university you can use. And I keep telling students every week, check the online system, make sure your grades in there are accurate and okay. Don't tell me the last day of class that things are wrong or you're not happy with how things are going, because I'm giving you that feedback right now. It just saved me a lot of time on the back end. And I tell people, explicitly, don't tell me you worked really hard and you want your grade increase. The evidence of how hard you worked and what you've learned is within this point system. That's how I measure that in an empirical way. Not everybody likes that, but I think they respect it, so it works well for me. Any questions about teaching?
Do you
Yes.
have any trouble with students that aren't working with students in a classroom in terms of the videoing and bringing that in, or are your courses aligned to when they have practicum or student teaching?
That becomes an issue in some cases, but I set up opportunities for them. I have enough relationships with places where kids with disabilities are on campus or at adjacent schools that I make that happen for them if it doesn't. So similar to to Vanderbilt Middleton, kids got people downstairs to Susan Gray or something. Similar idea. It's a good question. And some of you will teach classes that there is no fieldwork component, so you can't use my idea of all the video-based feedback. You might have to do written assignments instead. But overall, if you just think of creative ways of how can I give live, in-person, real feedback that way, I think it's higher quality, more effective, and more efficient of everybody's time.
I'll just add one more tip that I think has been helpful in my classes. On the syllabus, I say if you ever want to challenge a grade that you don't think something was graded accurately,
Yeah.
that you have to turn it in at the beginning of the next class, and you have to have a written explanation of why you think it was incorrect and what grade you think you should have received. And I find that to be very helpful because it greatly decreases the number of people who are willing to do it.
Yeah.
Plus, if you're not a person, if there's a very confrontational student, it kind of gets you away from the conflict and you can actually reflect on their request more objectively.
I have that same policy. Although I do tell people that if you look at your grade and it's like, I just messed up entering it, and you don't have to do that. You can just tell me you should have given me X number of points. Because that happens too. I also tell people that if I gave you more points, just don't tell me. Keep it to yourself. People still tell me though, I'm surprised after I say that people still feel the need to be really honest. So now I've actually gotten to research, which is the most important part of my job. But again, the things that I've learned that have been the most useful really have been how to budget and minimize that other time so I have the time that I need to work on research projects. So the best advice that I got was really being mindful about budgeting your time. So I have really clear goals for what do I want to accomplish in the next 5 years, back up what do I want to do this year, so what do I need to do this month, this week, this day in order to work towards that goal. That really helps you kind of stay on track. And it's kind of fun to, like a year into your plan, go back and say, well, how am I doing? Am I matched up with the plan that I set up? Do I need to adjust? You probably will adjust some, that's okay. But you're really making intentional decisions, so you don't see yourself just getting derailed by whatever opportunity is in front of you. You're being really intentional with the work that you're doing. It's interesting because I made one of these plans when I first started. Now I'm in the 5th year. And I look back at all the boxes, and many of them I can check, and some of them I've gone in a different direction. But I'm happy that I've made choices intentionally, so I didn't accidentally not do something. I made a conscious choice of, there's something else that I'm going to do instead. I try to set natural consequences for meeting or not meeting daily goals for myself. Otherwise, it's hard to get myself to do it. So I like to work out. So I tell myself I can't work out until I hit X target. The other natural consequence I set for myself is that if I don't hit a certain target, I'm either going to have to pull the laptop out after my child is already asleep in bed in the evening and work, which I really don't want to do, but I have to do if I didn't meet my goal, or I have to get up an hour earlier than what I would have the next morning and get to work on it. And those are powerful enough consequences for me that if I hold myself to them when I don't meet expectations, then I change my behavior. So kind of treat myself as my own single case design environment. So what I need to be doing. The other advice I have is that when you first start your job, it's like you have all of this time that you didn't have before because you're probably going someplace new. Most of you probably aren't going to stay here at Vanderbilt and work. but you're gonna have to build new connections with schools, you have to get things through IRB. So for at least for that first, usually at least semester, you're probably not going to be running a lot of studies where you yourself are collecting live observations with kiddos in school. So you gotta think of something else that you can do to be productive in that time, because you have other time that you can use. So these are just some things that I have found success with, and they are projects that I continue to do alongside my applied work in schools, because if there's sometimes that the schoolwork is going a little slower, you just have more time, you can pick up on these other projects and keep your stream of publications going. So a lot of these are things that you should have a lot of skill at. How many of you already have done your map or in the process of doing your map? So I hope you love doing it, because I feel like I do a new map like every year, right, on something. So systematic reviews and meta-analysis. How many of you have taken the meta-analysis class here? If you haven't, that class is awesome. It doesn't exist now? It went away? Oh no. Well, advocate to get your meta-analysis class back. I use that content all the time. It's really helpful, both when you're reviewing other people's work and you can step up your own systematic review by using some empirical methods. And you guys have some great expertise here in your department about kind of emerging ways to do that with single case design work too. So maybe if you can't take the class, you can leverage those people who have expertise that are in your department.
And I will say there are available trainings that I
Programs, so some universities like Vanderbilt and OSU have post-secondary programs for people with disabilities. There might be someone you can partner there and run either an applied or a descriptive study. University daycare that includes kiddos with disabilities. These are all things that I've been able to do that I'm not going to access those things as often now that I have work in schools up and running, but in the interim, when you first get someplace, it's a lot easier to get into those places quickly than it is to develop new relationships with school systems that you've never worked with before. Other people have done this, I haven't, but people have done studies where they actually use their students in their courses, so undergraduate pre-service teachers as participants. I've seen people do really clever things where they treat one section of the class differently than another section and run some kind of comparison. It's a cool way to use your time efficiently, be able to have some work before your things in schools up and running. Something that's becoming increasingly important to me is really budgeting my time for writing. So when I first started, I felt like it was relatively easy for me to find time to write, but the longer that you work somewhere, the more people ask you to do stuff that's outside of your research wheelhouse, and you have to really intentionally set aside time for writing. There's different things that different people do that work for them. I have a colleague who just blocks out like every Thursday, just the entire Thursday, and she just tells people that she has an appointment and they try to schedule something with her during that time. I don't do that, but that works really well for her. Something that I do that works really well for me is I block out time early in the morning. So none of my colleagues come to work before 8 or 9, so I know that if I get to work 6 or 6:30, no one's going to bother me. That's my time that I'm going to be able to write efficiently. Email used to take up a lot of my time. It used to be kind of a time creep thing. So I've gotten I turn off my email notifications when I'm writing because I can't resist the temptation to check them. Just don't have that self-control, so I eliminate that as an option. The other thing that I have a problem with is just the internet in general. There's always some day that something on the internet is more interesting to me than whatever research question I'm working on. So I cannot access ESPN.com if I switch off the internet switch on my laptop or unplug it from my computer. That way I have to do something really intentional to hook back in. And whenever I do that, I'm amazed that I think I need the internet to write because I need to access all these things. And often I can go like 2 hours and I don't miss it because I have everything that I need locally. And if you get interrupted a lot in your office, find someplace else to go. So I have someplace in the library that no one knows where I go to work. And if people actually are bothering me early in the morning, I need to get that work done, I go to that place. Because I'm more comfortable doing that than telling them not to bother me. So non-confrontational way of making sure I get my writing time. Something else that I do is if you set aside this 3-hour block and you get like an hour and you just get really discouraged, like I've written like 3 good sentences. This is not very good, which happens all the time. I switch to something that I get more tangible progress from. So I'm like, I am going to work on my reference list right now, and I'm going to actually have new pages written by the time that I'm done. Or I'm going to work on something in my method section that's really formulaic, sit down and do it, and it's done. Or I switch to a different paper where I can work on one of those pieces. So that way I have something that I can feel good about by the time that I'm finished. I also write discussion and introduction last, and I spend a lot of time writing outlines of those sections before I actually do them. I'm going to go a little faster since I'm running short on time here. Something that I love is having master's students who do theses, because often they come to me and they have no idea what they want to do for their thesis. So I have a list of stuff that I tell them that they would like to do. And I say, you can pick between all of these things. You can pick your own thing if you want, but if you pick something from this list, I already have the IRB ready to go, and I'm really well situated to support you. But it's okay if you pick your own thing. And they always pick something from my list because it's the easier path from them. And it's something that can be published when we're finished. Give them high quality mentoring from the get-go to make sure they're going to do well. Meet with them really often. I see people who don't mentor their students as well when they're doing a master's thesis, and the product isn't as good, so you don't feel as good about your mentoring. And it's also not something you can mentor as well on. It's not inside your wheelhouse. And also you can't publish it when you're finished. So it's just better to put that time in on the front end, mentor really well, not only for your student, but also so you can send a good flow to publication with those students that you work with. Something that I've learned to do is to channel people who have given me feedback in the past. So all the time I think, what would Eric do when I'm writing something? I don't know how well I actually do with that, but I do that often. Or what would Lynn Fuchs do? She gave me great feedback in that great writing class. And that's really helpful to me to try to look at it with a fresh set of eyes and not think, oh, I really like the things that I wrote, and think, well, how would someone with this critical lens that thinks this way, how would they think about my work? It's also really helpful to have somebody else read your work. Sometimes for me that ends up being a doc student that I work with if there's not a colleague who I think is going to have time to do that. But anybody is better than nothing to get an outside perspective. Something else I do that I also do on an exercise bike or a treadmill or elliptical is I print out the paper and I bring my phone with me and I use the text-to-voice feature and I have it read my entire paper with me like text-to-voice so that I don't read what I meant to write on the page, it reads what's actually there. And I catch all kinds of things much more quickly than I would if I were just looking at the script trying to figure out, edit myself. I promised a couple of people that I was going to share my procedure for how I handle negative reviews or annoying reviews. So how many of you, I should send the message that most reviews that you get, most of what you get in the review is really constructive feedback. People thoughtfully thought about your work and you appreciate it, you're able to learn from it and do something different. But there are also reviews that you just have a visceral reaction to once you read it. How many of you have had a visceral reaction to a review? All of you, right? So what I have learned is that I am not going to be able to constructively and productively react to that feedback in the moment. So I'm not going to try anymore. And I'm just going to embrace my emotional response, get rid of it, and then set up a timeline for how I'm actually going to address that feedback. So what I do when I get a really negative review is I turn on I'm the Man by Aloe Black. I guess that's not song. Crank it up in my office. Feel good about myself, say whatever choice words I'm feeling for the reviewers, let it go, turn off the music, and then I just sit down and I, on my calendar, make a plan for when am I actually going to come back to this and really read through and figure out what I need to do next. It's usually at least 2 days later because I've lost my emotional response, and then quickly react to that feedback and figure out what I need to do next. Find if I try to do something right then in the moment, I am getting angry instead of reacting in a way that's going to be constructive and have me write a better paper. And many times, when I'm initially annoyed or frustrated, I find there is some piece of what someone has said at least that I need to react to and figure out what I can do differently. There rarely is a case that when I'm completely done with revisions, I think that was just idiotic. I still think it was dumb. I have a couple minutes left. I'll hit some highlights. Building relationships with schools. I went someplace there were not a lot of people doing work with public schools, applied research, and special education, so I had to figure out how I was going to make this happen. If you have colleagues who already do that work, leverage them, that's great. But if not, figure out other things that you can do. So one thing that's been really helpful for me that has been an in is if I supervise student teachers or practicum placements in schools, I develop relationships with those teachers, I ask them things that would be beneficial to them, and they become advocates for me to be able to do research in their school district. People like special ed administrators or superintendents respond better if you make requests and you can say, I've had these conversations with these teachers already in your district. Here are things that I know they're interested in doing and I want to help them do that. So you can seem like you're responsive to a need that's actually coming from the district. I also try to offer to do stuff for free. So I before I ask them for something, I offer, do you have any PD days? Here's a list of things I'd be happy to do for free for your district before I go back and actually ask them for stuff. And if it's things that I've already planned and done before, it's not a lot of extra time to work for me, and it pays dividends for building that relationship. Something that I've only done in one school district is when I don't get a response from emails, phone calls from a higher level administrator, is I show up at the office and I don't leave until I have an appointment to actually meet with them. Because many times you're communicating with a secretary or a staff person, that it's easier for them to ignore you than to actually make a time for you to meet with somebody. And it's not that someone is responding negatively to your work itself, it's just that they think, well, this is someone who's not asking for something that's within my job description, so I'll just keep ignoring it and they'll go away. So I try to nicely not go away until I actually get to meet with somebody. I maintain relationships by any student data that I have. Most of my work is partnering with teachers or paraprofessionals, so they are actually the ones implementing the interventions. I take all the student data, I package it in a nice way, hand it to them, and say, here, take credit for this IEP conference. Here's all the data on the student that you can use. You're the one that did this work, so you don't even have to say anything about OSU. Just share the good work that you're doing. I summarize that data for higher level administrators, meet with them at least once a year, sometimes once a semester, to say, this stuff is going really well, take a look at this. And I share that before I ask for anything new. So try to always use the rule that I'm offering something before I'm asking for something else. And I thank people a lot, all the time, even if I'm not really pleased with them while I'm thanking them. I thank them for being willing to partner with us. I think my time is pretty much up.
Much more than you have.
I'll skip ahead to balancing work time with family time.
Yeah, maybe like 5 more minutes.
Is that okay?
People need to leave.
Okay. The other thing that I do is I calculate how many hours I want to work each week and still have time to actually spend with my wife and children. And I budget time to be able to figure out how many hours do I need to work in the work week, how many hours do I need to work in the work day, and how are they actually going to fit in, and I hold myself to it. Because if you don't, things will pop up and they will creep into your personal time. So I budget it really intentionally. And then I also identify those extra times that if I don't have enough done, I'm not going to take away family or personal time in the evening. I'm going to figure out another time that I'm going to take. So maybe I'm going to have to work after kids are in bed or get up and work earlier in the morning. Or there was a semester where I decided I'm just going to have to pick one day a week and stay and work until the evening, and that'll make it so the rest of the week goes much more smoothly. So being really intentional about when you're giving up personal time so you don't find yourself really dissatisfied with that balance that you have. And the other thing that Chris and I were talking about yesterday was answering email on personal time. So I think we have different strategies for doing this. Chris has taken his email off of his work email off of his phone completely. I have just a setting that like after 6 o'clock it doesn't get sent to my phone, so I don't see it anymore. Because otherwise you see it and you respond to it. And we were discussing that there are some emails that people work things out on their own, and they just email you because it's easy to do. It's just like the students thing. I was like, it's so easy to shoot off an email, right? The first thing that people think of doing. Sometimes people can work them out on their own. And I've just learned that I am not so important that someone cannot wait until 6 o'clock the next morning to hear from me. It's not going to change the world. That is okay. So just relax and make that wait. And I also just have boundaries with the time that I spend. So I say I'm not going to work after X time. I hold myself to it. That sometimes that means I have to work really, really early in the morning, but I'm happy with that balance that I achieve. And I have a laundry list of suggestions for how you can increased time for yourself for research goals. And a lot of these relate to going back to rethinking how you're balancing service, teaching, and those kind of issues. I think that's it.
Any quick questions? Maybe time for a question or two? Will you make this available to PowerPoint?
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I'll share the email, PowerPoint. Any questions? Are good? Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you for being here.